Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tiago. Great to meet you.
So, your first episode, you grabbed your iPhone, you put it on the table, and you start talking with a professional footballer, right? Soccer player,
That's
football? I don't know. It's always the which sport
right.
depends where we are in football. Yeah. Now you have a kind of professional setup. Tell me, is does the material, the microphone, really matter for good quality, or is your other episode still up, still having listeners?
Look, that first episode really was raw. It was just fun. It was a great conversation that happened. And I think the content that I got with Amy Sayer is fantastic. And so it's still up there. It's still listened to. And every time she plays for the Matildas, the Australian women's football or soccer team, I always get another spike in people who have listened to that episode. So it's a good one.
Yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. When you interview other people that are famous, and I noticed that as well with my own interviews, that it might seem that your episode is dead, but then if they come back and then they score an amazing goal or whatever, they do something, even when they get interviewed in other podcasts, then, and I had a similar case recently, I suddenly started getting a lot of views and listens in one episode. I was like, why? And then I just noticed that they got interviewed in a much more famous podcast, and suddenly my podcast was getting kind of towed along, right? So it is really cool.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely find that. Yeah.
So do the pitch of your podcast. Like, you have 30 seconds to speak about what's your show about. Tell us the name and tell us what's all about.
Awesome. Look, the Second Wind Academy podcast is all about helping elite athletes find their careers after sport. It's all about finding their essentially second wind in life. And I do that through the stories of those athletes who have been through that career transition or are planning that career transition. And what I've realized through the podcast, which is weekly, and I interview an athlete anywhere around the world, from Olympic to professional sports to college basketball or American football. And the lessons that come out from them are really applicable to everyone who looks at changing careers at some point in their life.
That's interesting. What was the most radical change from sport to some other profession? Because normally, people get into coaching or they never really leave the industry of, sports. What was the most radical change?
The most radical change? Well, a cool question. I think it's the ones where you realize, it's going to sound bad for all the athletes, but you just realize how intelligent they are. So it's ones where they're doing a sport, and there's one lady who was a world-class rower. And in the end, she ends up being this super scientist looking at water sustainability. And as you're speaking with her, you sort of realize, wow, okay, you had this love of water whilst rowing. And so you find this beautiful link, but not anything that I would have been thinking as I began the conversation.
Wow. That is crazy. Going from, sports to becoming like kind of a scientist. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
What about you? What is your story?
Yeah, well, look, it's why a lot of this started. So I was a professional footballer back in England when I, started life. So I left school at 16 to become a professional footballer. But for me, the path didn't, fulfill itself the whole way. I didn't lift the World Cup for England. So I transitioned into banking and strategy. So I spent good 15, 20 years in the world of banking and traveling around the world. And then relatively recently, I then shifted back again to get back into coaching and supporting athletes to transition to careers after sport like I did. And I thought, hold on, what was the essence of what I did? And I thought, well, if I speak to others, I'm probably going to hear in them the stories that can perhaps inspire other athletes to come forward as well.
So the why behind your podcast is to inspire our other athletes. Do you also use it as a way to support your business?
It is used as a way to support my business. And the real reason is because the business is all about guiding athletes to their next career. And what I've learned through these conversations with athletes is one of the most important things about people going through career transition is talking about it, is listening to those stories from others and thinking, oh, they did that. Maybe I can take something from their experience and apply that to myself. So it does work in a way to support the business, which is indeed providing that guidance to athletes that, hey, you can go from, one really super focused sport for 15 years to create your own career, to find that second wind in life.
Mm-hmm. And how often do you publish your episodes?
Yeah, the podcast comes out weekly. So every Wednesday, a new episode drops, a new athlete sharing their story.
Okay, that's a lot of logistics there, right? Because you always interview people. A lot of the times you also interview in person, right? So I'm curious about, first of all, how do you do your planning? Like, how do you find your guests? How do you invite them? Like what kind of DM or message do you send to them? And how do you make sure that every week you have an episode ready to publish?
Yeah, great question. Look, I would say one of the bits I've realized about myself is I'm a process person. I like that structure, probably, again, the athletic mindset, that same thing over and over again. So I quite like that routine with the regular interviewing. For me, finding the right type of guest, I do a bit of research, often through LinkedIn or through Instagram. The beautiful thing about LinkedIn is I get to see them in a somewhat professional setting, and they tend to list where they've been, what they've been doing. And then I look for this thread of a story where it's like, wow, how did they move from that sport into that particular role or that field of study? So I often reach out to people on LinkedIn. Nowadays, I'm happy to say people are reaching out to me and asking me if they can come on. What I then do is, through a bit of chat, I use a platform called Zcal to help book meetings. So we book in a time. And I then tend to, if it's remote, so video, because I'm comfortable interviewing people across time zones, then I would tend to get them on Riverside, and definitely use Riverside as my sort of recording platform to go up. And I tend to try and book a few weeks in advance, which means that I'm not desperate to have someone to interview every week, but I've got that time to make sure I find the right guest who I think's got a great story to tell, and there's some lessons that others can learn from.
When do you have your episode ready to publish? Is it on Wednesday that you finalize everything? Or is it like on Mondays, it's already scheduled to go out?
So I'm a planner, and so usually by the Thursday before the Wednesday. So as one's released, the next ones are scheduled, and they're scheduled then to go out. So I tend to be that bit ahead to reduce that last minute pressure.
I think that kind of planning is definitely essential if you want to have such a show where you interview people, and the editing part is always so hard as well for me. I remember when I interview people, it's so hard because you have to remove all the silences. Sometimes you remove all the ums and the likes and all these feeling words, and it can be really time consuming. Like how much time does it take for you to fully edit an interview?
Well, I think at the start, it took me a ridiculously long amount of time. I tend to have them in long format where it's a conversation, and that conversation can be, it can be 30 minutes, it can be an hour, right? And I sort of let the conversation flow. Nowadays, the most important for me is to capture the conversation and flow. So I edit as little as possible. And so where it flows, I just let it go. I'm no longer as precious about the pauses or the gaps too much. As long, and at least at the moment, I'm always ready for feedback. But at the moment, it's very much a case of trying to let the conversation flow as much as possible, which reduces the amount of time that I edit. And, certainly recently started to get a bit more editing support, as I'm now thinking, okay, what might be next.
So you hired someone to help you with that?
Yeah, that's right. So now I've moved into hiring someone because I feel I've got a process, and a process that's simple and repeatable, which means me bringing somebody in to help sharpen the sound and do things like that I think can just raise the level of quality, the audio quality.
Interesting. So what tool did you use to edit before hiring someone?
I was honestly, I was still on Riverside.
With Riverside, you can also do the editing. Okay.
Yes.
And now you hired someone. I'm curious about that. So, ballpark, what are the prices normally? You probably did your investigation to see how much does it cost to get an editor?
Well, do you know what? What I found was the price difference was huge. So I started on things like, I could be on Fiverr and someone could
Fiverr, you get always the cheap.
Yeah. Well, that's right. But what I realized was, well, here, as long as I know what the process is and I'm telling them this is what I want it to be and these are the effects or sounds that I want them to do, then I could go down the Fiverr route. But I very quickly learned that that wasn't what was actually important. What I needed, someone who worked with me at my rhythm and could also understand or follow the conversation that I was having with an athlete. So they would then start to say, okay, well, actually, this bit doesn't sound good, or this bit quality is awesome. I'm going to take out that bit at the start because it's not relevant to the story that came in later. And so the person who, now who I've gone with still oversees from me, but she's awesome because she understands the message that I'm trying to convey.
How did you find her?
Referral. Friend of a friend.
That's always the best way. Right?
Yeah.
That's the best way.
I love that networking and sort of supporting one another, growing together. So, so for me, she's awesome because she understands what it is that I'm trying to get across. And so the relationship was more important than paying a low price.
Yeah. And it's certainly so much easier to just finish your recording and send it to someone else and they will take care of that, because I would love to do that. I'll probably do that as well. I've tried it in the past. Yeah, I didn't work out great, but I guess, I just didn't have the right person. Now, I'm curious about the in-person setup. So what is the main, not the difference, but what does one need to be careful when setting up a studio or setting up a conversation in the same room? Because it's always so hard, because how do you get your microphone to only capture the right person? How do you prepare the room? Do you make it cozy? Tell me everything. How is your setup?
Yeah, so I suppose the biggest challenge that I faced with the setup is that microphone and just hearing it echo across everybody at the same time. And you can hear it in some of my early episodes where I'm in the room with them, and you can if you listen carefully, you can hear me talking all the time. So you can hear it on their mic and on my mic, and it's a bit infuriating. What I've learned though is that the type of mic that I using a pod mic, which for me has provided a much better or crisper sound. The proximity that I have it to us in the room, again, I've found has been quite easy. And use of headphones has been a game changer. And that's been one of the pieces for me, certainly helping athletes, especially as I introduce video, to use headphones and say, it looks okay. But that I found is really helping me to remove or reduce echo.
How does the headphone remove the echo?
Well, I should probably sound really technical now, but I know as I was researching it, what it means is they are hearing, I suppose I don't know the real technical way that it's doing it, but just from a sound perspective, I'm finding that I'm getting a much crisper sound, and I'm using I use the Zoomcast, or the P4, Zoom P4, which is really helping as well. So I'm not sure on the tech or what's actually changing.
So they hear themselves and obviously they hear you through the headphones.
Yes, okay. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, when you see people recording in person, you always see them wearing headphones, right? So certainly they are there for a reason. But it's interesting
Yeah,
that actually made the whole change. The whole difference in the terms of sound quality for you. So I think that's a great tip as well for the listeners here.
yeah,
Now, you are old Podsqueeze user. We're just
yes,
talking about how you started basically when you first started the platform, which is amazing because you have seen how the platform changed.
yeah,
But
yes.
I'm curious to see, like, how do you use Podsqueeze in your flow?
Listen, Podsqueeze is a game changer. It has been, continues to be a game changer for me. When I first started, I would do the recording. I would then, initially on using Zoom, but it was getting the transcript. I would then have to look at my own notes. So whilst I was talking, I'd be typing. And again, if you listen to my old episodes, you can hear the tap, tap, tap as I'm typing away during the interview, taking notes, because I would use those notes to then write write the notes on the to write up my notes, to write
Yeah,
um, the 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 tweets, the Instagram posts, the LinkedIn posts, my newsletter covers, all of that. I would then have to sort of figure out and type up based on my recollection of
right.
the conversation. Where Podsqueeze has changed that is I finish the recording, download, upload it up to Podsqueeze. So before the event, upload it to Podsqueeze, and then suddenly everything comes through. All of the starter points for the newsletter, starter points for the title, starter points for the blog post, all of that just kicks in straight away. I'm now, since, and there's even more that's come through since I've started using it, but that took away a day. In fact, I shouldn't say
Yeah.
it took away a day. It gave me a night's sleep again.
That's
That's
great.
what it got me. Yeah. I wasn't
Makes
there
me
at
really
10.
happy to know that at least now you're sleeping because every not only athletes need to sleep well, so as well podcasters. So it's great
That's
that you
right.
have that.
That's it. It gave me a night's sleep again. It was awesome.
Mhm. So you have your newsletter. You also use the newsletter. So I guess you send a newsletter to your listeners as well? How do you
Yes, I
manage
do.
that?
Yeah, yeah. So usually as the podcast comes out, so I've got a regular routine in terms of posting now. So the Monday before the episode, I'll usually put something out on LinkedIn. On Wednesday, I'll drop the episode, and again there'll be a post that'll go out through LinkedIn, Insta, Facebook. And then on Friday, I'll usually put in a quote. So again, these are some of the quotes taken through Podsqueeze as well, and I post one of those up as well. And then on the Saturday, I tend to send out my email to my general listeners and subscribers, those who may have come through the website, join the mailing list.
Hmm.
And that's where I'll then send out a note talking about, hey, this is who I had this week. Here are some of the key
Wow.
points, the
Mhm.
key lessons from it. And a lot of that content is ghost written by your good selves at Podsqueeze.
Amazing. Yeah, and that's also a masterclass on repurposing. I love the flow and how you have everything so organized. And again, that's probably due to your athlete mindset. So I guess as a last question from my side, what are the things that you brought, and we spoke a little bit already about this, but you brought from your athlete times that are applicable, those qualities that are applicable now in your career and especially in your podcasting career? What are the things that if there's someone that is a known athlete that they would ask you this, hey, I've never been an athlete. What are the things that I should learn from you as an athlete that I can then apply to my business and to my podcasting?
So I guess we've spoken through elements of that, but one of the great things that athletes do is they bring a level of consistency and a level of, I'll say, perseverance.
Mm.
And what that really means is when we have a plan, or when you have something that you want to go and achieve, it's set that strategy, put that plan in place, and then keep working hard at doing it. Make sure you're doing something that is repeatable. So something you can break it down. And the beautiful thing about breaking something down into process steps, making it repeatable, is that you can improve it. And if you can improve it just at 1% each time, then, by the end of a year, you're probably going to be around 40% better than you were the year before. And so that
Lovely.
constant improvement and process, that's what's really key.
Lovely. That's, I think, great advice for every podcaster or for any human, really, that want to get better in whatever they are doing. So, Ryan, thank you so much. Just tell us again the name of your podcast and your socials. How can we find you?
Sure thing. So it's the Second Wind Academy podcast. That's Second Wind spelled 2NDWIND Academy podcast. You can find me on website 2ndwind.io, so secondwind.io. Same again on Instagram, which is where I'm certainly very active, and of course on LinkedIn, which is a great place to find people who are doing that shift or that transition change.
Perfect. All the links will also be in the show notes of this episode. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to speaking with us.
Hey, Tiago, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is brought to you by Podsqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.